Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the December edition of the French Cinémathèque, which is a collaboration between the Federation of Alliance Françaises USA and Telescope Film. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Justine Barda, and I'm the founder and director of telescopefilm.com, a website for international film and TV. We offer a database of over 500 million international films and series with links to where to watch them in the US. We also have a dedicated page on the site for French film and TV with information about what's new and what's popular from France, as well as curated selections. We are delighted to be collaborating with AFUSA, the largest Alliance Française network in the world, helping 25,000 learners of French each year learn French, live French, and love French. Here's a short video. Okay, I will put links to more information about AFUSA and Telescope Film in the chat in just a moment. The French Cinémathèque usually takes place the fourth Monday of every month, but next month we'll be up against the Sundance Film Festival on the fourth Monday and Martin Luther King Day on the third. So we will be meeting next month on Monday, January 12th. Almost exactly a month from now, please mark your calendars. We will be talking about the new film from Jafar Panahi, It Was Just an Accident, which is also France's submission for the Best International Feature at the Academy Awards. This film won the Palme d'Or at the Cannes Film Festival. It is a remarkable film and one of my favorites of the past year. But today we are talking about Nouvelle Vague, a delightful way to end the year. Before we get started, just a couple of brief housekeeping notes. Please keep yourselves muted when you're not speaking and stay on speaker view. To ask a question, please raise your hand using the Zoom feature at the bottom of your screen in the reaction section, or you can always put your question in the chat. If you have technical issues, you may want to leave the Zoom, then sign back in after a couple of minutes using the original Zoom link. This event is being recorded for our YouTube channels, and the total runtime is 1 hour. And with that, I'd like to introduce our facilitator, who is also the chief film critic for Variety, Peter Debruge. Over to you, Peter.
Thank you, Justine, and hello all. I hope you enjoyed this movie. This movie has been one of the great delights of my year, but I'm not sure if everyone has that same reaction or if it's film critics who kind of light up with a movie that is basically a Valentine to French cinema, and especially, of course, the Nouvelle Vague, the French New Wave. So this movie gives us an excuse to go in a dozen different directions. We can talk, of course, about the film, but we can also talk about the kind of time period that the film points to, the personalities it kind of dramatizes and represents, and what maybe even your own kind of early love, falling in love with French cinema moments may have been. The film itself, Nouvelle Vague, premiered at the Cannes Film Festival. Now, I would have given anything for this to be the opening night of the Cannes Film Festival. It just seemed like it was designed for that. Richard Linklater, who's a director from, I guess it's my hometown, Austin, Texas. It's where I went to college, the University of Texas. So this is a Texas boy through and through. Not this guy, he was born in California, but Richard Linklater, kind of is from East Texas, lives in Austin, started the Austin Film Society, and early in, I think, his kind of college age, was discovering international cinema and watched Breathless. I think depending on what age people were when they saw Breathless, they all kind of have been touched by it differently. If you were sort of there to remember it in 1960 when it kind of hit the scene, it was a revolution in cinema and, kind of rewrote the rules for filmmaking around the world, including in American cinema. A lot of American directors immediately started copying the movie to the extent that the movie Bonnie and Clyde, was kind of designed as an American French New Wave movie, and they had that Warren Beatty originally wanted Francois Truffaut to direct that film. However, if you are Richard Linklater, who's not that old, he caught up with it later, and it, was kind of like part of his film education, and that, of course, applies to me too, and I think a lot of other people who kind of come to Breathless as a way of understanding in reverse how cinema got to be the way it is now, how uh, a lot of the kind of techniques and almost like philosophy of contemporary cinema is forever changed. You wouldn't have a director like Quentin Tarantino, who seems so incredibly mainstream, if it weren't for a director like Godard along the way to sort of do the cinema eating its own tail type film that Breathless represents, taking a gangster movie that is basically a pastiche of earlier gangster movies and using all these kind of modern techniques. Anyway, I'm nerding out already, and we're only a couple minutes into this thing. But the film premiered in competition at the Cannes Film Festival. Linklater had two films last year. The other one's also delightful and no connection to France, but worth catching up with. It's called Blue Moon with Ethan Hawke. That's about Lorenz and Hart, the kind of musical composing duo, and the tail end of their career. That movie premiered at the Berlin Film Festival. So it's really a special thing when a major director is able to kind of provide two really quality movies in the same calendar year. One at the Berlin Film Festival in competition, Nouvelle Vague had to be at Cannes. It wouldn't have made sense to have those the other way around, would it? But it was also interesting to experience that movie there, which is kind of like the ultimate test. You have an outsider, an American director, coming over to Paris. It's clearly shot on a lot of the original locations, with a French cast, so not in a language he necessarily knows, and trying to do justice to a movement that technically belongs to another culture. Now we get to hear, I guess, from a few of you on whether you think he pulled that off. I think I describe this movie to people as being like champagne. It's like filled with the kind of the energy and the inspiration that I think drives young filmmakers to the point that, when I was teaching my film class, if I had been presented with this movie, I might be tempted to show Nouvelle Vague in lieu of Breathless, because I think the original Breathless, À bout de souffle, the Godard film, is sometimes challenging in the way that it holds up. And I think that that's something Linklater kind of identified with when he caught up with it in his 20s. In interviews, he's said, I wish I could say that I immediately fell in love with this movie and it changed my life. But the truth is, I didn't understand it. And that's something I can identify with certain of Godard's films, especially as his career went along and he became more political and more polemical in kind of his philosophy of cinema. But let's hear just, kind of some casual reactions from the group about kind of how you felt and whether some of you may know a great deal about the new wave and might have been playing kind of very detail-oriented police officer with this, and others may have felt it, kind of like really was enlightening. I'd love to hear a few reactions. So just raise your hands and we'll call on a few of you, and then we can kind of throw some more specific discussion points in. But who had kind of a strong reaction to this? Gail, go ahead. Just be sure to unmute yourself. And I see that Jean and Maggie will come next.
Well, I thought it was a wonderful pastiche of the original movie. It gave us insight, humorous but yet valuable insight into the creativity and origination of the movie and the characters themselves. I especially love the way their names were displayed on the viewer, because these were real people. and and also Godard's personality was so perfectly portrayed. It was great. I mean, the whole thing, even Seberg, how she spoke French so poorly, was wonderfully, you know, illustrated.
Yeah, it's a tricky thing to do that as Linklater to have the ear for both kind of like how an American sounds speaking French, but also how a Swiss man sounds speaking French, because Godard is not a native born French person, and he, kind of has a very signature sound and voice that Guillaume Marbeck captures. Okay, Jeanne, love to hear your thoughts.
I just loved it. And for a lot of what was just said, but I remember I'd taken a French class several years ago, and that was my introduction to the Nouvelle Vague and Le Cahier, that they all were working on and all these things. And it was so neat. I love the way, because I haven't seen Breathless itself, but I love the way they were like these heroes, the movement that were suddenly
Mm.
there before us. And it was just so cool to think, oh, look what they're doing, look what they've done. And it was so exciting and so enjoyable and so cute and so fun. And I just like have to see Breathless and see the original real characters and the real people. But it was just neat to realize that I'm so happy that there was this homage being paid to what these guys did, because it was not something that at that time was the norm. And it's just so wonderful to see that now, in hindsight, this has certainly had a place in our culture of film in the world, globally. It's just, I love it. So thank you for having chosen this or whoever selected it. It was great.
Yeah, it's interesting how the movie provides an enormous amount of history, but it doesn't necessarily provide so much context. By which I mean is it's not spelling it out. And I think a lot of this stuff will have come up to people whether in a cinema class or in a French class, like as you're saying, as we see the kind of group of, it's largely a boys club, of these male critics working for Cahiers du Cinéma at the time, who kind of start to feel a certain itch to make movies. And one of the things I love about this film is that it takes Georges Beauregard, who is the producer and a figure who's almost never talked about. And it really kind of centers him, or at least puts him in the midst of all of this. And it's funny to see that done because, as many of you probably know, one of the words most associated with the French New Wave and the Cahiers crowd is auteur, the auteur theory, which is sort of the myth of the filmmaker, the director, as the ultimate author of the work. And that is, of course, something that a self-fulfilling prophecy, I think, that these directors really, endeavored to uphold. That is that the writer of the film is the director, and the director is kind of upholding his own vision, and he's not in service of a producer or an organization. And yet, this movie, without ever once saying the word auteur, I don't think I heard it spoken, uh, includes the producer, and we can talk a little bit more about his role later. It includes Truffaut, who's often the screenwriter or the co-writer of this movie, to whatever extent this movie even had a script. One of the jokes is it's kind of being done on the fly, right? But it includes the co-writer, which also kind of dilutes a bit the idea of an auteur. But of course, there's no questioning that Godard and his caprices are kind of driving what we see. Maggie, go ahead, and I see the other hands raised. We'll come around to you guys.
Um, this movie came out when I was in college, and I'm not sure when it came to America. But anyway, all I could think of is, I want to be a student at the Sorbonne. I just, I was at that age, or, in the 20s when I was so excited about, and I don't know how much I paid attention to the plot or, anything. Um, but anyway, so yesterday, or no, the other day, I watched a film that we're watching, and then yesterday I watched Breathless again to see.
Great.
And the thing that struck me so hilariously was all the smoking. And especially in the satire, they're constantly blowing
Yeah.
out their cigarettes even more, than in Breathless. It was pretty funny. So I think I got some of the humor, but I'm sure I missed some of the French nuances, things that were going on. So if anybody has something that I should remember, should know, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, it'd be great to hear that. Meek, will come to you in a. Actually, if your answer is directly related, why don't we call on you really quickly?
No, you were, Peter, you were saying that Godard was from Switzerland, and I'm originally from Geneva, Switzerland. And the history is that my dad and Godard's father went to medical school together.
Oh,
Yeah, and they were friends. And I remember my dad was saying, "Oh, he has so many problems with his son. Jean-Luc escaped and went to Paris, and he should have gone to med school, and he's lost, and I cannot stand what he's doing." And you remember in the film Breathless, and in fact, it was repeated, I think, in the
in
new
Nouvelle
film,
Vague.
saying the prettiest girls were between Geneva and Lausanne. And everybody between Geneva and Lausanne in Switzerland knows that because
Okay.
that put them on the map. So anyway, that's the Swiss, but he was from Switzerland. He also had dual nationality, French, and he died in Switzerland on Lake Geneva in a villa somewhere. So he went back to Switzerland to die there.
That's right. I can't remember. I think it might have been one of these cases of assisted suicide that
It could have been, could have been.
Switzerland permits.
Yeah.
But there's more than just an accent that Swiss people have, and I won't speak for you, Meek, but I think it's one of the things that when we think of Godard and just his personality, there's a different sense of humor, if indeed there's a sense of humor detectable at
Absolutely.
all.
You speak
It's like,
differently. The accent is different.
but even the worldview, and so it made him kind of,
Absolutely.
it's not so evident to non-French speakers, but to the French, there is
Very.
always something slightly apart
Because he's
from
an observer.
in Godard's case,
Yeah.
yeah.
Mhm.
And I mean, it's also quite evident just with affectations like this silly way that he wore sunglasses at all times indoors and out, even in screening rooms and such. Suzette, your turn.
Audio. Okay.
Well done.
I will try to keep my comments down. I probably have 50, but I'll do 3 or 4.
And we can come back to you later for more or something as they apply. Yeah.
Of course, I love this film. It was I was in film school later in life when I learned about New Wave, and I remember we were sort of in different camps. Either you were in the Truffaut side or the Godard side of things, and I was a Truffaut lover more. I had more trouble with Godard, but this movie just made me love him all the more. And I was very interested to see how the imagined conversations between all of the directors. And I thought he did an amazing job of casting them to look like the actual characters too. That was fun. But did anyone else notice in the film that they had the real change dots came up a couple times? He planted those in. I just thought that kind of detail to that era and the black and white film stock, and I have goosebumps talking about this movie. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to get to see Breathless again. It's been quite a while, but it's on
I
my
want to follow up on something you said. You were kind of, making a distinction between the Godard camp and the Truffaut camp. And rather than impose my reading on that, I'd be curious to know kind of what those two schools kind of represent to you.
Well, I think Godard was more political generally in his filmmaking and his ideas. Like Truffaut was more storytelling about life, family. I'm thinking 400 Blows. Chabrol was sort of the
Hitchcock of the group, I guess, doing
That's a
the
good
mysteries.
comparison.
Rivette did more sort of lighthearted tales of people having fun things. I don't know. It's just like
Yeah, there's kind of an abstract experimental quality to Rivette. I think you're right on. The Godard is clearly intellectualizing a lot of this, and we get to hear him, kind of holding court a lot of the time.
That's what I found so fascinating, sort of imagined conversations, which I'm sure there's been things written about that could be researched and found.
It seems like they might have taken like nuggets either from people's essays or from interviews and put them into their mouths as dialogue. So that's why I think it would be a great tool for film school, is that you have distillations of some of the ideas that probably were not kind of like being thrown around on set in quite this way, but were very much kind of a cultural cinephilic conversation happening at the time.
You think the auteur theory or label on them sort of was imposed on them later on, after everyone had sort of a more rigorous body of work and we could see the patterns that were happening with them.
I think that comes
they
actually
call themselves auteurs.
No, I think it's André Bazin who introduced that idea, and it was earlier. So it was almost kind of a theory that was kicking around, and what he was referring to was not themselves, but to Hollywood cinema. And so within Hollywood cinema, could you identify certain directors who they would have considered authors and kind of the responsible party for the kind of imprint on a work, or were they basically the equivalent of a journeyman or kind of a for hire type thing, as a lot of directors were? Like, I mean, you can kind of, the auteur theory has kind of won film criticism. And I think it's kind of a lazy critic's crutch, because there's so much that goes into a film. Today, Rob Reiner, we're all kind of mourning his loss. And I think Reiner is such an interesting case because he's someone, as a director, who didn't impose himself on the material. He really did what was needed to make it better and kind of rely on the gifts of his actors and to make sure the screenplay was strong and never be calling attention. And so I'm not sure people would call Rob Reiner an auteur in the way that someone obvious, or maybe the best case American or English language example is Alfred Hitchcock, who seemed to be telling the same obsession every film in kind of the same way. So it's very clear the repeated thing. So you had Bazin sort of introducing the politique des auteurs. You had this kind of idea percolating. And then why I call it a self-fulfilling prophecy is because then the French filmmakers kind of embrace that notion as almost license to be more dictatorial in their own approach. And later in America, you start to see the film school generation doing the same thing. So you have like the Coppolas and the Scorseses and the Spielbergs taking license from the French New Wave and the auteur theory to themselves kind of fight to have more of themselves in their movie. One more thing to just close a thought there is Truffaut. 400 Blows is a personal film. It's a humanistic, dramatic, very, very kind of sincere telling. And right from the beginning with À bout du souffle, you get in Godard something that's very meta. It seems to be quoting other cinemas, other movies. You see that in the movie Nouvelle Vague, where, they'll be either referencing Humphrey Bogart or quoting other movies. And it's like, this is why I connect it to something like Tarantino. And there's so much today of this kind of postmodern stuff, but it kind of goes back to that. You almost have a total rift in terms of whether someone's being true, or whether someone's being almost entirely in air quotes or hypothetical. Alan, do you want, Suzette, you want to insert one more idea?
One more thing out. I am in the Truffaut camp, and my absolute number one top favorite movie of all time, always on my list, is Day for Night.
That's a great one. And funny enough, it's one that starts to be a lot like Nouvelle Vague, no?
Making of a movie.
Right.
I guess I like that, theme. So
Yeah. It's fun that you picked up on things like the cigarette burns or whatever you call the little sprocket, the dots for a real change. And Linklater has said, because I think a lot of people have misinterpreted this movie as being a Godard film, meaning that they think it's a fair leap to make that like, oh, Linklater's making a film about the making of Breathless as if it was Godard making such a film. And his actual explanation is, no, I'm embracing the new wave, but it's more like one of the lesser known directors, like a Jean Rosier. Imagine that he's kicking around with the camera, making kind of like filming the making of. So you've got kind of a new wave sensibility. A lot of people describe Richard Linklater's movies as hangout movies. And so this is kind of like hanging out with the French New Wave during around the shooting of Breathless. Okay, Alan and Jerry, I never know which of you
Oh,
or both of you will hear from. I'd love to hear thoughts.
Um, yeah, I this was a real heavy dose of nostalgia. I was very impressed with how Linklater so successfully captured the look of the movies from that era with the black and white, the narrow aspect ratio. I also immediately noticed those cigarette burns in the upper right to notify the projectionist that Suzette also noticed.
Which is
And I'm
hilarious
sure
for a
there were,
movie streaming on
yeah,
Netflix, right? But
yeah. Well, I mean, it's been ages since I've seen any of those. And so as soon as I saw them, I immediately noticed them. Every 20 minutes you get them. Um, yeah, I'm sure there were many details that I was not astute enough to pick up on, but in how he managed that look. I also loved the scenes in the Paris metro. I've been quite a number of times to Paris, and I always use the metro, and I love the metro. My visits to Paris don't go quite as far back as the 50s and 60s, but that's the way the metro looked when I was first going to Paris. I was actually in Paris a few weeks ago, and I still love the metro, but it just looks completely different. Those glass walls, to keep people from falling on the tracks. I guess that's what they're there for. And the sliding doors and everything, it just looks completely different and when I saw it in the film, I mean, that's the way the metro looked back then. Anyway.
above and below, it's like there's still a few stations that are like that, but those beautiful kind of like Art Nouveau, entryways that still exist around certain parts of town. It's like one thing about Linklater as a director, if you look through his entire career, I find just really special to him is that he will maybe a half of his movies are period pieces, and there are few directors who really seem to understand period in quite the way he does, which is like really being able to think like at that moment, what would have been playing on the radio and how would people have been dressed and would they, their body language have been different. And I think we've seen so many period pieces and most of them seem to be kind of adjusted to kind of modern sensibilities, and it really feels like this is some kind of like rolls of film that got archived, from a behind the scenes kind of thing. It's like to me, it's a very convincing artifact of its time. The let's see, have we kind of gotten the first kind of round of
I
reactions? Go ahead, Gail.
I just have a question regarding Godard. Do you think that this is basically the first movie ever about a director? So poignantly about a director?
Oh, in my experience, no. It's
Oh,
definitely it's not even the first movie about Godard. There was one made by Hazanavicius, who made The Artist a few years back
oh, okay.
during the
Right.
chapter that was the shooting of Le Chinoise, which was
Hmm.
kind of a really politicized moment with protests and everything in Paris. And Godard became very kind of militantly kind of socialist in his politics around that time, and that has Louis Garrel in the role. But your point was not movies about directors. You know that there are such things, but like whether there's one that when you say poignant, I'm curious because I find, and one of the things I really like about this movie is I find Godard hard to take. He's kind of a jerk, you
Yeah,
know.
he is a jerk, period. He is a jerk.
So, what is it that you kind of connected with in the portrayal of him? Was it that
Well,
it's realistic?
I'm amused by the fact that he we made fun of him and he was made fun of, but he also made fun of himself. I mean, he displayed his fallibility. I mean, and he was the ultimate intellectual. I also love the way they dressed then.
Sure.
I
I mean, a
mean,
lot of that is probably accurate to photographs or what the costumes are at the time, but it all feels
right.
very much, true to its era. The no, there are quite a few movies about filmmakers, both factual and not. I quite like a comedy from a few years ago called The Disaster Artist,
Mhm.
which is probably the total opposite from this, in that it's a movie that had zero influence and is kind of the laughing stock of Hollywood. But it had James Franco playing this peculiar, comes from somewhere in Europe guy with a indecipherable accent. Could be French. We could watch The Disaster
Mhm.
Artist here. His name is Tommy Wiseau. Should we do The Disaster Artist soon? The
Yeah.
it's got James Franco doing this portrayal of what is kind of maybe the worst movie of the last 25 years. And it's quite amusing. It's got Seth Rogen and I think I'm remembering that right. His brother Dave Franco's in it. The but there this is actually kind of a preoccupation slash obsession of Hollywood's, in a few recent examples here in recent years, the Academy Award keeps going to movies about movies, like The Artist, like
Mhm.
Argo, like
Mhm.
the like Birdman. But the I think what that may be a common fixation for filmmakers, and why wouldn't it be? It's the world that they know. But I think what we get here is this. There's something. I feel there's something like a scrapbook quality about this, that it's really paying homage. In fact, I brought a couple sound bites in to share with you. One was an interview I did with the actor, and I realized that the sound bite that would be more appropriate right now would be the one. Let me just cue this up here, uh, and then I'll share my screen.
When did you interview the actor?
So the actor Guillaume Marbec is one of Variety's 10 actors to watch. This is kind of an annual list that we do, and I was so knocked out by this performance. This is the actor's first role. He's interested in being a filmmaker. He's worked in all sorts of. He basically told me he'd worked in every department except maybe like costumes and makeup or something like that along the way. And this was a casting opportunity that came along. But first, I'm going to share a soundbite from. This is not an interview I did, but one that I found, and I thought just as kind of an interesting insight into why. Uh, why Linklater wanted to do this. So I'm not the most, I'm juggling too many screens here. Share my screen. Um, can someone remind me how to do this? Maybe it's here on the lower side.
Share link
Share
at the
screen.
bottom of the Zoom window. Right.
There we go. Um, there we go.
Yeah, and Peter, if you're going to if you're going to play a sound, you need to click share sound as you go into the share.
Oh, I hope I did that. Let's see. Do you guys see my screen?
Yes.
All your own experience.
Can you hear my screen?
Yep.
Like this is very
Maybe
much
turn
to
the
me
sound up.
about the making of my first film, and I say my first film the one that I had a crew and people looking at me. I'd worked alone for a long time and even made a feature that way. But my first in Slacker, I had a crew of like 7 people. But it's a big deal all of a sudden. Everybody's wondering what you're doing. I didn't have a conventional script. I was doing it very unconventional. And kind of pretty inspired by the Nouvelle. So that notion, I think that's what this movie shows, is if you're going to do a different kind of film, it's okay to do it differently. And that just rubs the people around you who are just wondering what's going on.
So what I think, in some ways, it might be now I have to unshare my screen, stop share. I think it might be intuitive, but this is Richard Linklater being quite rigorous. This is a movie he conceived, and he worked with screenwriters to tell this way. But in Godard's situation, he is kind of reliving his own first experience. And something that the actor told me is there's this scene that's kind of like a fight, like a physical fight between the producer, Georges de Beauregard, and Godard. And this is apparently Linklater's favorite scene. And it's funny to think what an audience enjoys and what motivates a filmmaker. But it's, here we have a pretty true to the account retelling of the making of Breathless, but we also have someone identifying through his own kind of struggles. And that's why I think whatever that kind of imbues it with, it also is the reason the takeaway is this kind of love of cinema and this desire to, hopefully, I think if you did show it to young people, if they have the slightest, it might be a good litmus test. If you yourselves have a child or a grandchild or, a family friend who's thinking of going to film school, you show them this, and if they don't come away with it wanting to grab a camera and start directing right away, they're probably not going on the right path, and you might save their parents or yourself tens of thousands of tuition dollars. But because this is really about that kind of irrepressible, you can't be stopped. I love how you, Alan, you talked about the subway scenes. One of those subway scenes is Robert Bresson, who's a elder kind of to this generation. The shooting pickpocket in the metro, and one of the things he's complaining about is, I need extras for a few scenes, and but they're making me use the same extras for each of them, no matter whether it's in this location or that location. And Godard is sort of saying, that's the kind of problem I'd love to have one day. But, I think what we see in that, and it's what I always loved kind of focusing on with students, is how can you be creative within constraints? And this movie is, such an illustration of that, just kind of like making a movie on limited resources. To take a quick digression about de Beauregard, the producer, this is something that I learned when I was working on this big essay on the filmmaker Agnès Varda for a book that the Academy Museum did tied to an exposition on her, because she predates this group, as does Jean-Pierre Melville. I don't know how many of you know him as a filmmaker, but he appears in the movie. He's got the big cowboy hat and kind of the swagger. But both of them were kind of ahead of these boys in the French New Wave who get all the credit, and they, with 400 Blows and Le Beau Serge and À Bout de Souffle, those 3 movies really are the kind of lightning rod. But I think they were all looking to these 2 earlier examples, one being Jean-Pierre Melville, who, instead of wanting to go through the studio system of France and kind of work his way up till you start as an assistant director, until you can finally direct, he created his own studio, and he was really an independent. And that's why I think he's kind of a godfather of sorts to this crowd, and why Godard reached out to him and visits the set and, invites him to make the cameo in the film. But Varda is really, more or less a contemporary of these guys. She's a few years older, but she had been a photographer, really didn't know the first thing about movies, went and got together a group of the people from the Théâtre National de Paris and had a few actors go down to set where she was from and made this little movie. Sorry, the name of it has just gone out of my head for some reason, but a no budget movie, that really wasn't widely seen, but this would have been almost 5 years before the Cahiers guys did. And I've always had it in my head that these guys, in the way that sexism works and would have worked in the 50s, would have said like this little girl could make a movie by herself. Like, what's stopping us? And they kind of like, rallied. And Georges de Beauregard is a producer looking for obviously to make money, but it's at a moment where he gives a modest budget and uh, these constraints are largely responsible for a lot of what I think we associate with the French New Wave. These movies have to be shot on black and white with cheap light cameras, available light, kind of in contemporary settings. A lot of them were writing about how they didn't like these elaborate costume dramas set on the back lot on studio sets and all this kind of stuff. Well, it's convenient to have that opinion when you can't afford any of that, right? And so they're all kind of doing they like grab a camera and go out into the streets and make a movie philosophy. But de Beauregard finances 400 Blows and says, this is what my research has told me, says to Truffaut, well, that movie didn't cost us very much and it was very successful. What else? Who among your friends can do something like this? And he points to Godard, who then makes A Bout de Souffle. I might have gotten the order backwards. Does Breathless come before? In any case, the chain is along these lines. They're basically, de Beauregard goes back and asks, which are the other kids in your crowd can do this, and it's like, then the baton passes to Jacques Demy, who makes Lola, the sort of his first film with Anouk Aimée. And Jacques Demy is married to Agnès Varda at this point, and Varda was planning a very elaborate film, but because de Beauregard comes with a modest amount of money and these constraints, we get Cléo from 5 to 7, which is a movie shot almost in real time on the streets of Paris about a woman kind of waiting to hear whether this kind of anxiety-inducing diagnosis will be terminal cancer or what, as she wanders the streets of Paris. So there's this way in which we really see this kind of bubble, this community of filmmakers that is the French New Wave. But we also are reminded that the producer is not unimportant, and not only is he enabling them with the budget, but he's also putting some of the restrictions that become so essential to this kind of youthful, lively thing that might have inspired young people at the time to want to go to the Sorbonne or to visit Paris. So I see that this movie has really unleashed in me the French cinephile. So let's bring the conversation back around to the crowd. But so let's talk a little bit about the cast, because this is Zoe Deutsch is a familiar face to some. She's an American actress, who's worked with Linklater before in plenty of movies. But by and large, this Linklater has assembled a cast of unknown to us young actors. What did you think of the people you saw here? Some of them, like the actor who plays Belmondo. We all kind of know what Belmondo looks like, right? Any thoughts about kind of how you felt about them? Were you when you know them, are you kind of looking to play? Is it exactly right, or is it the spirit? Constance, go ahead.
I loved the casting, and I loved it more, I think, because they weren't such familiar faces. Because I totally bought the movie. I just believed everything. And I believed it was made back when the original film was made. Everything seemed right. The costumes, the sets, the dialogue. It just seemed so believable to me. And it took me a little bit to get into it, the choppiness and all that. But once I watched it half yesterday and half this afternoon, once I did, I just thought it was wonderful. And I especially liked Jean Seberg. I thought she was great. And Belmondo. When I was 16, I had his poster in my bedroom on the walls. I loved his character.
Belmondo is such an icon, and that's a really tricky one to match because it has to have enough of the physical resemblance, but there's really something about his attitude, the kind of swagger, the kind of almost like nothing seems to matter to him. I loved personally learning some of these stories I didn't know about, the kind of short film that they'd made before and the kind of source of their loyalty, and because it's one thing when you're Richard Linklater getting a cast to make a movie among French people that is an homage to this. Everybody wants to do it. But when you're Godard and you're unproven and you're trying to get a cast to sort of like, make the movie that will revolutionize the film industry, it's really kind of interesting to see how that happened. Would you like me to share a minute and a half of an interview with Guillaume? What I found interesting and very charming about Guillaume, so he came to the United States, studied cinema in New York for a time, did some kind of like entry-level internships and work in, I think, with an animation house maybe in Los Angeles. So he's really kind of like trying to find his foot in the industry. He's obviously therefore fluent in English, but he had kind of a craftiness to him about how he went about getting this part. And this isn't the segment that I'll play, but he talked about how like he needed the glasses. That's like for the audition. He asked a friend who like has an ophthalmology business or something for the glasses, and somehow that made him late for the audition, so that when he showed up, he had the glasses, but he was kind of rude in showing up, and he kind of took the attitude of what would Godard do in this situation? So instead of acknowledging or apologizing, he just kind of like had a bit of an ego. But this part I thought was quite funny, and Netflix didn't want me to use this in the story, and the story was meant to be about Guillaume, but you may enjoy the kind of behind the scenes. Let me see, share sound this time. There we go. Story of the audition, where it wasn't for Linklater, it was for kind of a different casting agent there in Paris. So here we go.
Like he was looking for people that are not worried about being naked or like physically engaged in some scenes and stuff. So I thought it was a total scam, because he was offering me to play Jean-Luc Godard in directing Breathless, directed by Richard Linklater.
Right.
This was completely nuts. So I thought
already that doesn't, now that the movie exists,
that doesn't
we understand, right. But it's like,
no.
It's
there's
unprecedented.
There's a lot of people to ask for this part before me.
Yeah.
So I went on the casting with a knife in my pocket just to defend myself if it appears to be.
Do you mean literally or figuratively?
Yes, for sure. Yeah. And so I practiced during 2 weeks on my sofa just to learn the voice, because Godard has a very distinctive voice.
Yeah, of course.
So I had to learn all this. Because I don't really look like Godard. I can fake it with glasses if I cut my hair, I'm not the same face,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I had to max out my chances with the voice.
Right.
And I knew I could nail it.
All right, there we go. Again, let me uh so I will go back and paraphrase, but I think you can probably get it from the beginning of the conversation. He responded to a casting call that did not sound legit, and it was, and in the casting call, it was saying those elements of what the movie would be, and that actors should be, willing to be naked or whatever, not literally meaning naked, but in this case, like I don't know, emotionally so, but he thought he was showing up for something sketchy. And lo and behold, but I think as we see there, you kind of see or you can tell what he really sounds like, and even what his much warmer personality is. He has to, kind of like become Godard, who, as Guillaume described it in our conversation, is like playing the Pope if you're in France. I mean, this is really like, one of the gods of French cinema. Now, before posing another question, I see Jeanne has her hand up. So if you'd like to say something, go ahead.
All right. Bonjour tout le monde. Merci. So I'm an actor and I'm also a director. I have more theater direction experience. But so one of the things I was just thinking of, because I watched the film like this night of our last conversation, so it's been a month, but I loved it. I went to the Sorbonne. I lived in Paris in my junior year abroad. Everything. I was trying to remember if I'd seen the movie after I was there. If one of my French friends who was a cinephile introduced me to a lot of great films. But anyway, so from an acting standpoint, and just like what you've been talking about, that what Godard was doing was revolutionary, innovative in the sense that, was improvisation, and, kind of like what Woody Allen seems to do. And the other part of it I got from the producer, the backstory. I don't know a lot about, Godard's or the Nouvelle Vague for that matter, but that, because the producer was teasing him on the bench when they were first working out whether he was going to back him or not. Like that last script you gave, that terrible script, or the script that wasn't finished, like basically what I took away was that, the guy wasn't really capable of finishing a script. And this was more of not so much deliberate, but that just like, okay, this is the way he was so passionate about doing it, but he didn't have the ability to really script it. Or maybe he, that's the impression that I got, but it worked. And then when he's in that passageway of the apartment with Jean, and she's ready to quit, and she just can't, and they have that moment together, the two of them, and he's like, and you can help me out here. I think you might know where I'm going with this, because he was so passionate about film. He's like you, Peter. He was like a cinephile. He was a critic, right? He wrote reviews for...
Exactly, that's right.
He knew everything about film. And the producer was even teasing him about that, like, don't make this into this almost nerdy or whatever kind of thing. But he says to Jean, when she's about to, she's throwing her little hissy fit, Hollywood hissy fit in Paris.
Well, I think you might be thinking of the scene where she's asking if he'll send a car and he insists that she walks. Is that the one?
No. It's where she's about to quit. And he goes,
okay,
something like, now you got it. It's like, right. You haven't gotten how much this means to me to make this. I don't want to swear. You know what I mean? It's like everything was on the line for him.
Yeah.
And there was so much pressure. And I remember when they were showing up, and then he'd be like, okay, we're done for the day. Because he had to get back and to figure out what he was going to do. And he hadn't got the inspiration, and the producer's going nuts. And then, they're getting it. And everybody's just like, oh my God, what is going on? And she can't believe it. But there was something in that moment as a director where he was trying to infuse her with why are we here? Why are we what are we doing? Yes, this is new. This is like, he had that feeling that what he was doing was something, and he wanted her to put her ego on the line, as a director, to try to kind of kick her in the butt and get her on board with like.
Yeah, it's interesting.
You know what I'm saying?
It's interesting how there's both that, but there's simultaneous to that is the kind of seat of your pants aspect that seems to be going on. And so because Breathless and the French New Wave have been so mythologized in the intervening decades, it's interesting to go back and kind of see. I think in a lot of ways, to young filmmakers, it's not that this is the recipe for how to do it. I think there are a lot of it's a miracle that they got anything at all. But there is a kind of sense of what that energy feels like, the mix of inspiration and desperation, and to me, this is part of it. And also the idea that if you've been hearing for all these years of how kind of important the French New Wave was, this seems like within arm's reach, doesn't it, to like a young filmmaker today with an iPhone and whatever else. I mean, it's like there's a way in which it's kind of like my kind of joke, my joke, which I, by the way, have found a quotation from Alain Resnais, a character that we see kind of as part of this circle. He was making films slightly older. He made Hiroshima Mon Amour in the 50s, and and worked alongside these filmmakers for years. But I found a quote from Resnais that corroborates my theory that like Melville and Varda, were kind of doing it beforehand, and these guys looked to them for inspiration. But in the way that Varda went before, Melville went before, these guys did. And I think today's filmmakers, kind of like, or aspiring filmmakers, can look to this kind of example. But what you're picking up on is the thing that if you don't have it, if it's not like, if it doesn't mean everything to you, or if it's not like your driving passion, then you're in the wrong line of work, potentially.
Well, like your story earlier about someone going to film school and not really being passionate, not picking up. But I mean, at the time when I was watching it, I didn't quite get it. I had to rewind it. I'm trying to listen to the French, and I'm like, wait, what is he? And yeah, he had that odd way because he was very monotonal. And then she started to tease him, which was really cute. She got on board. She became part of the team. I mean, she was from coming out of that. Who was the director she just worked with that was so methodical? It was a totally different. And she was always quoting him at the beginning.
That's right. She just made Bonjour Tristesse prior to this.
And her husband really encouraged her to do it. And as they said at the end of the film, this is what everybody remembers her for. This was her, and yet she almost, like to think that she might have walked off because she couldn't take it. And it was so different from what most people.
Right. So she goes from kind of like this Otto Preminger set with an enormous budget and professionalism and certain expectations, but also having worked for, a different type of jerk and dictator to this, it's, frying pan to fire, but like, at the same time, you can see the enjoyment and frustration that kind of run hand in hand here.
One more thing, Peter,
yeah,
and
please.
I'm not as learned as you are in film, but I didn't think he was a jerk. I just thought he was weird. I just thought he was totally so into what he was doing, like an introvert, like a total genius. I mean,
yeah.
Yeah, and he was driving everybody nuts, except like the guy that came in, the cinematographer, had just been in the war. I mean, it was so brilliant, and to show how they put the camera, and it was guerrilla theater.
They're like stealing this footage by hiding the camera, no permits, all that stuff.
I mean, I loved it. It was a beautiful. Thank you again, like for recommending it. It was really.
Yeah, just to fact check myself, I looked it up. Georges de Beauregard had nothing to do with 400 Blows. This was the film that he took his first gamble with the French New Wave. So we're seeing that in the dramatizing the film. I was realizing as I was saying it didn't make sense that, this is really the one that kicks off that dynamic. Then Godard recommends Jacques Demy. Jacques Demy recommends Varda, and kind of like, the kind of opportunities spread, and they kind of follow this low budget, black and white contemporary storytelling. But of course, if you love these movies, we've been, spending all of our attention in this series almost entirely on new and contemporary films, but this should maybe kind of ignite your interest, if you want to go and watch Breathless, if you want to if you want to explore any of the other things in the French New Wave. Justine has been sharing a number of links for telescope.com, always a great resource for finding international and foreign films online, which can sometimes be tricky. But I hope that this kind of ignites your interest, inspires you to watch at least one or two other, if not all of Godard's movies. Have a little film festival kind of in the spirit of what you saw here. And then next month, as we've said, we will have a real treat. It's France's Oscar submission, but it is an Iranian film, and it's the winner of the Palme d'Or. It was Just an Accident by Jafar Panahi. So I hope to see you all next month. Thank you very much.
All right, everyone. Thank you. And special thanks, as always, to Melissa Sora, Renee Ketchum, Isabelle Leroux with the Alliance Française. Thank you to everyone who joined us today and for such a wonderful and warm-hearted conversation about Nouvelle Vague. As Peter mentioned, you can find dozens and dozens of films by the directors of the French New Wave on telescopefilm.com. I put links to collections of some of those directors in the chat in case you want to copy those out for future viewing. I've also just put a link in the chat to next month's film. It was Just an Accident. It is not streaming yet, but it will be shortly. So
by the end of the month, so you'll have a chance.
Excellent. And we will see you back here next month on January 12th. In the meanwhile, we wish you a great end to 2025. Thank you so much for joining us for the French Cinémathèque throughout the year, and for a year of great discussions of French film. And here's to more of the same in 2026. Thank you so much.
See you all in the new year. Have a great holiday.